The sun hung low over the Wyoming Territory, painting the endless grasslands in shades of amber and rust. Jack McKenna squinted against the harsh light, his weathered hands steady on the reins as his horse picked its way through the sagebrush. The year was 1882, and the West was changing faster than a man could keep pace with. Jack had been riding these lands for near on 15 years now, ever since he'd mustered out of the Union Army with nothing but a discharge paper and memories he'd rather forget. The war had taken his youth, his innocence, and his left earlobe, courtesy of a Confederate mini-ball at Antietam. But it was what happened after the war, during his journey west, that had truly marked him. The scar across his right shoulder blade still ached when storms rolled in, a reminder of the Apache arrow that had nearly ended his wandering days. He'd settled, if you could call it that, into the life of a drifter. Ranch work when he could get it, breaking horses for the smaller outfits that couldn't afford proper wranglers, and keeping his head down in whatever dusty town would have him. Jack McKenna was a man who'd learned the hard way that trouble had a way of finding you, whether you went looking for it or not. The town of Bitter Creek sat like a weathered sore on the landscape, all rough lumber and false fronts trying to look more prosperous than they were. Jack guided his bay mare down the main street, noting the unusual number of folks gathered outside Morrison's general store, their voices carried on the dry air, sharp with anger and fear. "Third wagon train this month," someone was saying. A woman in a faded calico dress wrung her hands. "The Hendersons barely made it out alive." "Apaches," spat another man, his face red beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Been getting bolder since the Army pulled most of the troops east." No. Jack dismounted outside the livery, handing his reins to the stable boy along with 2 bits. He'd planned to water his horse, resupply, and be gone by sundown. But as he walked toward the saloon, hoping for nothing more than a whiskey and some peace, Mayor Thornton's voice boomed from the store's front steps. "We need to take action. People. We can't wait for the Army. We need to send someone to parley with them. Try to work out some kind of agreement before this gets any worse." A bitter laugh came from the crowd. "Who's fool enough to ride into Apache territory with a white flag? Might as well paint a target on your back." Jack kept walking, but his steps slowed. He knew that particular band of Apaches, or at least, he'd had dealings with them years back. He'd learned enough of their language during a winter when injury had forced him to accept their hospitality. They'd spared his life when they could have easily taken it, and he'd never forgotten that debt. "What about that drifter, McKenna?" The voice belonged to Samuel Morrison, the store owner. "Heard tell he speaks their tongue." Jack stopped, his jaw tightening. Every eye on the street turned his way. Mayor Thornton, a portly man with mutton chops that had seen better days, descended the steps. "Mr. McKenna, we're in need of a man with your particular skills." "I'm just passing through," Jack said quietly, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his Colt's handle. Not a threat, just habit. "The Hendersons lost their eldest boy." "Mrs." Morrison called out, her voice cracking. 14 years old. Shot through with arrows while trying to protect his sisters." Jack closed his eyes briefly. A boy defending his family. The image hit too close to memories he kept locked away. "I'm not a negotiator," he said. "You want someone who speaks fancy. Get yourself a lawyer from Cheyenne. We need someone who can survive long enough to deliver a message." Thornton pressed. "Someone who knows their ways. The town council's authorized payment, $50 in gold if you can arrange a meeting. Another $50 if you can broker some kind of peace." $100 was more than Jack had seen in 6 months. But money had never been what drove him. And it wasn't what made him consider the offer now. It was the faces of the townspeople, the fear in the women's eyes, the anger barely masking terror in the men's. He'd seen that look before, on both sides of too many conflicts. "They're not devils," Jack said finally. "The Apache, they're people defending what they see as theirs, same as you. Does that mean you'll go?" Thornton asked eagerly. Jack looked west, where the mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky. Somewhere in those canyons and mesas, the Apache were making their own plans, driven by their own fears and anger. The cycle of violence would continue, each side striking back for the last grievance, until there was nothing left but widows and orphans on both sides. "I'll need supplies," he heard himself saying. "Tobacco, coffee, some trade goods. Nothing that could be taken as weapons. And I go alone, no escort, no followers. If they see a bunch of armed men, talking will be the last thing on their minds." Relief washed over Thornton's face. Of course, Morrison. Set him up with whatever he needs." As Jack followed the storekeeper inside, he caught a glimpse of himself in the window glass, a lean, weathered man in his late 30s, dark hair touched with premature gray, eyes that had seen too much. He looked like what he was, a man running from ghosts, about to ride straight into what might be his last sunset. The store's interior was cool and dim, smelling of leather and pickle brine. Morrison bustled about, filling a canvas sack with supplies while keeping up a steady stream of talk about the recent attacks. Jack half listened, his mind already on the trail ahead. He'd need to approach from the north, through Skeleton Canyon. The Apache would see him coming, they always did. But approaching from that direction would show he knew their customs, that he wasn't trying to sneak up on them. "You sure about this?" Morrison asked as he tied off the supply sack. "Man rides into Apache territory alone these days. We usually find him staked out in the sun with things done to him I wouldn't describe in polite company." Jack hefted the supplies. "Then I guess it's good I'm not polite company." Outside, the crowd had grown. Word traveled fast in Bitter Creek, and everyone wanted a look at the fool riding to his death. Jack loaded his supplies onto his horse, checking his rifle and ensuring his canteen was full. The familiar ritual of preparing for the trail calmed him, even as he felt the weight of the town's desperate hope settling on his shoulders. "When should we expect you back?" Thornton asked. "Give me a week," Jack replied, swinging into the saddle. "If I'm not back by then." He didn't finish. They all knew what it meant if he didn't return. As he rode out of Bitter Creek, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the desert floor, Jack allowed himself one look back. The townspeople stood watching, silhouettes against the ramshackle buildings, pinning their hopes on a broken-down soldier who'd spent the better part of 2 decades trying to forget the very skills they now needed him to use. The desert stretched before him, beautiful and merciless. Somewhere out there, warriors waited and watched, protecting their own people with the same fierce determination as the citizens of Bitter Creek. And Jack McKenna, who'd wanted nothing more than to disappear into the vast emptiness of the frontier, found himself once again riding into the space between two worlds, carrying nothing but words and the slim hope that sometimes, just sometimes, talking could prevent the terrible arithmetic of blood for blood. The horse's hooves beat a steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth as Bitter Creek faded into the distance behind him. Ahead lay the mountains, and beyond them, a reckoning he'd been avoiding for years. The Apache had spared him once. He wondered if that old debt would be enough to keep him alive long enough to prevent a war. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jack McKenna rode on, a solitary figure against the vastness of the American frontier, carrying the weight of two people's fears on his shoulders and the knowledge that some journeys, once begun, changed a man in ways he could never predict. The desert transformed as Jack rode deeper into Apache territory. The grasslands gave way to red rock formations that jutted from the earth like ancient bones, and the comfortable familiarity of ranch country faded into something wilder, older. By the second day, he'd left the last traces of white settlement behind. No fence posts, no telegraph lines, just the raw landscape as it had existed for centuries. Jack made camp that night in a shallow cave, knowing better than to light a fire that could be seen for miles. He chewed cold biscuit and jerky, washing it down with warm water from his canteen. The temperature had plummeted with the sun, and he pulled his blanket tight around his shoulders, listening to the desert's night sounds, the distant yip of coyotes, the whisper of wind through stone, the skitter of small creatures in the darkness. Sleep came fitfully, bringing with it the dreams that had plagued him for years. The battlefield at Antietam materialized behind his eyelids. Smoke and screams, the acrid smell of powder, boys calling for their mothers as their lifeblood soaked into Maryland soil. But worse than the war dreams were the others, the ones that came from his first journey west. He was back in the canyon 8 years ago, his wife Mary's laughter echoing off the walls as their wagon rolled toward what they'd hoped would be a new life in California. Their daughter Sarah, all of 6 years old, singing songs she'd learned from her grandmother. Then the thunder of hooves, the war cries, the arrows that found their marks with terrible precision. Jack had fought with everything he had, but one man against a raiding party was like trying to hold back a flash flood with bare hands. He'd awakened 3 days later in an Apache camp, his shoulder on fire from the arrow wound, expecting death. Instead, he'd found himself under the care of their medicine man, who'd saved his life for reasons Jack never fully understood. Perhaps it was because he'd fought well, or perhaps it was simply the incomprehensible mercy that sometimes bloomed in the harshest places. He'd spent that winter with them, learning their language, their ways, while his heart died a little more each day with the knowledge that he'd failed to protect the 2 people who'd mattered most. Jack jerked awake, sweat cold on his skin despite the desert chill. The eastern sky showed the faintest hint of gray. He rose, shaking off the ghosts, and prepared for another day's ride. By noon, he'd reached the edges of Skeleton Canyon, where ancient cottonwoods marked the presence of a hidden spring. He watered his horse carefully, knowing this might be the last good water for miles. As he knelt to fill his canteen, he noticed the signs, unshod hoofprints in the soft earth near the water, no more than a day old. They knew he was coming. The canyon narrowed as he climbed higher, red walls rising on either side until only a ribbon of sky showed above. It was perfect ambush country, and Jack's every nerve stood on end. His hand never strayed far from his rifle, though he knew if they wanted him dead, he'd never see the arrow coming. It was near sunset when they finally showed themselves. One moment the trail ahead was empty, the next, 3 Apache warriors stood blocking his path. They wore traditional dress, buckskin and cloth, faces painted for war. Jack recognized none of them from his time with the band, but that meant nothing. 8 years was a long time, and young boys became warriors while old men passed into memory. Jack raised his right hand slowly, palm out, and spoke in their language. "I come in peace. I seek counsel with your leaders." The warriors exchanged glances. The one in the center, a man perhaps 30 years old with a scar running down his left cheek, stepped forward. "You are the white man who lived with us, the one who speaks our tongue." "I am," Jack confirmed, dismounting slowly to show respect. Standing while they were afoot would be seen as arrogance. "Why do you return? You left with the sunrise and swore not to come back." The memory of that departure stirred. He'd left because staying hurt too much, because every child's laugh reminded him of Sarah, every woman's smile of Mary. "I come from the town they call Bitter Creek. They seek peace." The scarred warrior laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Peace? After they poison our water holes? After their long rifles kill our game? Peace is a word the white man speaks only when he is afraid. Fear can be the beginning of wisdom." Jack replied carefully. "They have lost people, as have you. The blood cries out for more blood, but where does it end?" "It ends when the white man returns to the east where he belongs," another warrior spat. Jack knew better than to argue. Instead, he reached slowly into his saddlebag and withdrew the tobacco he'd brought. "I ask only for the chance to speak, to carry words between your people and theirs." The warriors conversed quietly in rapid Apache, too fast for Jack to follow completely. "Finally," the scarred one nodded. "You will come, but know this. If treachery hides in your heart, the eagles will feast on your eyes before the sun sets tomorrow." They blindfolded him before leading him deeper into the mountains. Jack counted the turns, the changes in elevation, filing the information away from old habit. His horse was led by one of the warriors, while another walked behind, close enough that Jack could hear his breathing. When the blindfold finally came off, Night had fallen. They stood in a valley hidden deep in the mountains, where perhaps 50 wickiups formed a rough circle. Cook fires dotted the darkness, and the smell of roasting meat made Jack's stomach growl, reminding him he'd eaten nothing but cold rations for 2 days. The scarred warrior, who'd introduced himself as Black Crow, led Jack toward the largest fire, where several elders sat in council. But as they approached, a figure emerged from the shadows that made Jack's steps falter. She moved with the fluid grace of a hunter. Tall for an Apache woman, perhaps 25 years old, her face would have been beautiful by any standard, with high cheekbones and eyes that caught the firelight like polished obsidian. But it was the way she carried herself that struck Jack most forcefully. This was no mere woman of the tribe. The warriors stepped aside as she passed, and even Black Crow inclined his head respectfully. She wore the traditional dress of an Apache woman, but modified for movement and combat. The skirt split for riding, a knife at her belt that was no mere tool but a weapon. Her long black hair was bound back in the style of warriors, not maidens, and when she looked at Jack, he saw an intelligence there that seemed to pierce straight through him. "So," she said in perfect English, her voice low and controlled, "you are the man who learned our words and our ways, then fled like a coyote in the night." Jack was taken aback. Few Apaches spoke English this well. "I am Jack McKenna. I've come to speak for the people of Bitter Creek." "I know who you are," she replied, switching to Apache. "I was young when you stayed with us, but I remember. You carried death in your eyes then. You carry it still." Before Jack could respond, one of the elders spoke. "This is Morning Star, daughter of our former chief. She speaks for us in matters of war and peace. If the white men want words, they will speak them to her." Jack studied her more carefully. Morning Star. He remembered a skinny girl with that name, all knees and elbows, following the warriors around and demanding to learn their skills. The transformation was remarkable. "Then I will speak plainly," Jack said, addressing her formally. "The people of Bitter Creek wish to find a way to live without bloodshed. They are willing to discuss boundaries, to respect your hunting grounds." Morning Star's laugh cut him off. "Respect? They speak of respect while their cattle strip the grass, their wheels scar the earth, their presence drives away the deer and elk?" She began to pace, and Jack noticed how the firelight played across her features, turning her beautiful face into something fierce. "Tell me, Jack McKenna, where was this respect when they poisoned 3 springs? When their hunters shot our women gathering pine nuts, claiming they thought them deer?" "I don't defend those actions," Jack said quietly, "but more killing won't bring back the dead. It will only create more widows, more orphans, on both sides." "Pretty words," she said, stopping directly in front of him. She was tall enough that their eyes were nearly level. "But words are like autumn leaves. They look pretty as they fall, but they're still dead things." "Then, what would you have me tell them?" Morning Star was quiet for a long moment, studying him. Then she spoke, her voice carrying to all assembled. "You will stay here tonight, tomorrow. You and I will ride to the border stones. There, I will give you the words to carry back, but know this, if your people want peace, it will come at a price. The question is whether they are willing to pay it." She turned to Black Crow. "See that he is fed and given a place to sleep. Post guards. If he tries to leave before dawn, kill him." As she walked away, Jack found himself watching the proud set of her shoulders, the way she moved through her people with absolute confidence. He'd come expecting to negotiate with war chiefs and elders. Instead, he found himself dealing with something far more dangerous, a woman who combined beauty with intelligence, strength with strategy. Later, as he lay on a blanket in a small wickiup, his belly full of venison stew and his mind racing with the implications of tomorrow's journey, Jack couldn't shake the image of Morning Star's eyes in the firelight. There had been pain there, carefully hidden but unmistakable to someone who carried his own. She had lost people too, bore her own ghosts. Outside, he could hear the guards moving in the darkness, ensuring he wouldn't slip away. But Jack had no intention of leaving. He'd come to prevent a war, And now he sensed that Morningstar might be the key to that, if he could convince her that peace was possible, that the cycle of vengeance could be broken, as sleep finally claimed him. Jack's last thought was of the warning in the title he'd never heard but somehow felt. The tribe had indeed sent their most beautiful warrior to negotiate, and he, fool that he was, had ridden straight into something far more complex than a simple ambush. The game had begun, and Jack McKenna, for all his experience and caution, couldn't yet see all the pieces on the board. Dawn came with the sound of horses and quiet voices. Jack emerged from the wickiup to find Morningstar already mounted on a paint mare, her rifle across her saddle. She'd traded her dress for riding clothes, buckskin leggings and a loose shirt that couldn't quite hide the feminine curves beneath. Her hair was braided tight, and she wore a man's hat pulled low against the rising sun. "You sleep like the dead," she observed as Black Crow brought Jack's horse. "Not wise in enemy territory. I'm not your enemy," Jack replied, checking his saddle and gear. Everything was there, even his rifle, though he noticed the ammunition pouch felt lighter. "That remains to be seen." She wheeled her horse around. "We ride alone. My people trust me to handle one white man. Can yours say the same?" It was a fair point. Jack mounted up and followed her out of the valley, noting how she chose a different path than the one he'd been brought in on. She rode like she'd been born in the saddle, her body moving in perfect harmony with her horse as they navigated the treacherous mountain trails. For the first hour, they rode in silence. Jack found himself studying her despite his best efforts not to. There was something compelling about the contrast, the warrior's alertness combined with an unmistakable feminine grace. When she caught him looking, her lips quirked in what might have been amusement. "You're trying to figure me out," she said, guiding her horse around a fallen boulder. "The white man's weakness, always needing to understand, to categorize, to make everything fit in neat little boxes. And your people don't try to understand their enemies? We understand you well enough. You want everything. The land, the water, the minerals beneath the earth. You take and take until there's nothing left. Then you move on like locusts. That's not true of all of us." She reined in her horse and turned to face him fully. "No? Then tell me. Jack McKenna, why did you come west? What were you seeking?" The question hit closer to home than she could know. "A new start, a place to build something with my family. And where is this family now?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Dead. Your people, not your band, but Apache just the same. Killed them 8 years ago." Morningstar studied him for a long moment. "And yet you lived with us, learned our language. Why didn't you seek revenge?" "Because hate is a poison that kills the one who carries it," Jack said quietly. "My wife and daughter are gone. Killing more people won't bring them back." "You speak like a woman," she said, but there was no mockery in it. "Most white men would have tried to kill every Apache they could find. Most men are fools." She nudged her horse forward again. "On that, we agree." As the sun climbed higher, the landscape opened up into a vast plateau dotted with juniper and sage. In the distance, Jack could see the dust of wagon trains on the main trail, tiny specks crawling across the immensity of the desert. Morningstar led him to a cluster of rocks where ancient pictures marked the stone, spirals and figures that spoke of peoples long vanished. "This is neutral ground," she explained, dismounting, "sacred to many tribes. Blood spilled here curses the one who sheds it." They sat in the shade of the largest rock, and Morningstar produced a water gourd from her saddlebags. As she drank, Jack noticed a scar on her shoulder, partially visible where her shirt had shifted. "Now you're the one staring," she said without looking at him. "That scar, arrow wound?" "Soldier's bullet. 2 summers ago." She passed him the water. "They attacked our camp at dawn. Women and children were still sleeping. My brother died trying to protect the elders. I took up his rifle and fought until they retreated. I'm sorry." She looked at him sharply. "Your sorrow won't bring him back. You said so yourself. The dead stay dead. Doesn't mean we can't grieve for them. Grief is luxury. My people need strength, not tears." She stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the rocks. "Your town wants peace. Here are our terms. They will withdraw from the lands north of Skeleton Canyon. No cattle, no hunters, no wagons. The water at Three Springs must be cleansed. They will remove whatever poisons they put there. And they will pay compensation for our dead. 20 horses and 50 head of cattle. Jack whistled low. That's a hard bargain. They'll say it's too much. Then more will die. She turned back to him, and for a moment, he saw past the mask of strength to the weariness beneath. I argued for this negotiation, Jack McKenna. Others wanted to attack immediately, to drive your people out with fire and blood. I convinced them to try words first. But if your people refuse, you'll lead the war party yourself. Yes? She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the sage smoke in her hair. You think me cruel. My mother was Mexican, captured and made a wife. She taught me your ways, your language. I have seen both worlds, and I know this. Your people will not stop coming, like a river in flood. They will keep flowing west. All we can do is try to channel that flood, to preserve what we can. Then why fight at all? Why not seek accommodation? Her eyes flashed with anger. Because without the fight, they take everything. With it, perhaps we keep something. Perhaps my sister's children will know what it is to ride free, to hunt the deer, to sleep under stars without fear of soldiers. Jack stood as well, suddenly aware of how close they were. You have a sister? 3, and 2 brothers still living. Her voice softened slightly. Many mouths to feed when the game grows scarce. The cattle payment, it's not for compensation, it's for survival. She stepped back, the moment of vulnerability passing. You see much for a white man. They talked through the afternoon, and, despite himself, Jack found the conversation engaging. Morningstar was educated in ways that surprised him. She knew the treaties, the broken promises, the legal justifications the government used to take land. But she also spoke of Apache traditions, of the complex web of obligations and relationships that held her people together. You're not what I expected, Jack admitted as the shadows grew long. What did you expect? A savage? A simple woman who would bat her eyes and agree to whatever terms you offered? I expected someone who wanted war. She laughed, and it transformed her face. Oh, I want war. I dream of driving every white face from our lands. But I also dream of my people surviving, thriving. Sometimes those dreams conflict. As they prepared to camp for the night, they'd return to their respective peoples tomorrow. Jack found himself oddly reluctant for the day to end. There was something about Morningstar that challenged him, made him think in ways he'd avoided for years. They built a small fire as darkness fell. The plateau stretched out around them, vast and empty under a blanket of stars. Morningstar sat across from him, the firelight playing across her features. Tell me about them, she said suddenly. Your wife and daughter. Jack stiffened. Why? Because I want to understand what kind of man loses everything and doesn't seek revenge. What kind of love that must have been. So he told her, haltingly at first, about Mary's laugh, how she'd insisted on bringing her grandmother's china on the wagon journey, about Sarah's curiosity, how she'd wanted to learn everything about the plants and animals they passed, about the dreams they'd shared of a little ranch. Nothing grand, just enough to build a life. Morningstar listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. They sound like good people. They were. My brother was like your daughter, always asking questions, always wanting to learn. He would have liked your books and schools. I think... She poked at the fire with a stick. Perhaps that's why I argue for peace. Somewhere, there must be children who get to keep their curiosity, their joy, even if they're not our children. You don't have children. She gave him a look that was part amusement, part challenge. No man has been fool enough to try to tame me. Maybe taming isn't what you need. The words hung between them, charged with meaning neither had intended. Morningstar looked away first. We should sleep tomorrow. You'll return to your people with our terms. But neither moved toward their bedrolls. Instead, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire die down to embers. Jack found himself studying her profile, the way the starlight caught in her eyes. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She carried herself like someone who'd never been broken, never been defeated, and he found himself both envious and admiring. "You confuse me. Jack McKenna," she said finally. "How so? You're not like the others. You listen. You see us as people, not obstacles to be removed. Yet you ride with them, speak for them. Someone who might actually want peace instead of just victory." She turned to look at him fully. "And what do you want? Really want?" Jack considered the question. What did he want? For years, he'd wanted only to forget, to lose himself in the vastness of the frontier. But sitting here with this remarkable woman, he felt something stirring that he'd thought dead. "I want the killing to stop," he said honestly. "On both sides. What? I want to stop seeing ghosts every time I close my eyes." Morningstar reached across the dying fire and touched his hand briefly. "The ghosts never leave, Jack McKenna, but perhaps, with time, they become companions instead of tormentors." The touch was electric, gone before he could fully register it. She stood abruptly. "Sleep now. Tomorrow, the real work begins." As she walked to her bedroll on the other side of the fire, Jack watched her go, understanding finally why she'd been chosen for this negotiation. It wasn't just her beauty or her intelligence. It was the combination of strength and vulnerability, the way she could disarm with a word or a glance. She was indeed a warrior, but her most dangerous weapons weren't the rifle or the knife, lying under the vast canopy of stars. Jack realized the game was more complex than he'd imagined. Morningstar wasn't trying to seduce him in any simple sense. She was trying to make him see, really see, what was at stake. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was succeeding. Tomorrow, he'd carry her terms back to Bitter Creek. But tonight, he allowed himself to imagine a world where the divide between their peoples wasn't so vast, where a damaged ex-soldier and a fierce Apache woman might find common ground beyond negotiation and conflict. It was a dangerous thought, one that could get them both killed. But as sleep finally claimed him, Jack couldn't quite let it go. The journey back toward the disputed territory took 3 days, winding through canyons and across mesas that seemed to exist outside of time. Morningstar proved to be more than just a negotiator. She was a teacher, showing Jack water sources he'd never known existed, pointing out the subtle signs of her people's presence that he'd missed before. "Your people ride through this land like blind men," she said on the second morning, kneeling beside a barely visible trail. "See here? My uncle passed this way 2 days ago. The way the grass bends, the depth of the track. He was carrying extra weight, probably meat from a successful hunt." Jack dismounted to look closer. "How can you tell it was your uncle?" "His horse has a crack in the left rear hoof. He's too stubborn to put the animal to rest." She stood, brushing dust from her hands. "Every person, every creature leaves signs. The earth remembers, even when people forget." They were following a narrow deer trail along a ridge when Jack's horse suddenly shied. His hand went to his rifle, but Morningstar held up a hand, listening. From somewhere below came the sound of voices, white men's voices, loud and careless. Morningstar slid from her saddle and moved to the edge of the ridge with the silence of a shadow. Jack followed, and together they looked down at a small canyon where 5 men had made camp. The remnants of a wagon lay scattered about, and Jack could see they were armed with repeating rifles. "Prospectors," Morningstar whispered, her voice tight with anger. "On sacred land, they seek the yellow metal that makes white men crazy. This is past the boundary. We're negotiating," Jack said quietly. "They shouldn't be here even by their own laws. When has that ever stopped them?" She watched as one of the men stumbled toward the stream, clearly drunk despite the early hour. "They poison themselves with whiskey, then poison our water looking for gold." Jack studied the scene below. These weren't townspeople from Bitter Creek. They were drifters, the kind who followed rumors of gold strikes and left destruction in their wake. But he also knew how this would look to Morningstar's people, more evidence that the whites couldn't be trusted to honor any agreement. "We should go," he said. "Report them to the authorities. Morningstar's bitter laugh cut him off. The authorities who look the other way, who take bribes and gold dust. She shook her head. No, but we will remember. When your people ask why we don't trust their promises, we will point to this. They circled wide around the prospectors' camp, but the damage was done. The easy conversation of the previous days was replaced by tense silence. Jack could feel Morningstar withdrawing, the walls going back up between them. That night, they camped near a spring hidden beneath an overhang of rock. Ancient paintings covered the stone, hunters and prey locked in eternal chase. Morningstar traced one of the figures with her finger, her expression distant. My grandmother brought me here when I was young, she said unexpectedly. She told me these pictures were made by the first people, before even the Apache came to this land. They're gone now, vanished like smoke. She said it was a warning, that all peoples pass away eventually. That's a dark lesson for a child, but a necessary one. She turned to face him. Your people think they'll last forever. They build their towns of wood and brick and think they're permanent, but we know better. We've seen empires rise and fall. Spanish, Mexican, now American. The land remains. Jack moved closer, drawn by the pain in her voice. Is that what you're fighting for? The land? I'm fighting for the right to exist, she said simply. To live as we've lived, to raise our children in the old ways, to die and be buried where our ancestors rest. Is that so much to ask? No, Jack said softly. It's not. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw her defenses crack slightly. Sometimes I think you actually understand. I try to. That's more than most. She sat on a flat rock, and after a moment, Jack joined her. They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders almost touching, watching the stars emerge one by one. Tell me something, Morningstar said eventually. If the negotiation fails, if war comes, what will you do? Jack had been asking himself the same question. I don't know. I won't fight against your people, but I can't fight against the town either. I suppose I'll do what I've always done, right away. The eternal wanderer. There was no judgment in her voice, just observation. Is that what your wife would have wanted? For you to drift forever? The question stung because it was one he'd avoided for years. Mary wanted me to be happy, to find peace. And have you? No. Morningstar shifted slightly, and her shoulder pressed against his. It was a small contact, but Jack felt it like a brand. My brother, the one who died, he was to marry a girl from another band. After he was killed, she came to me and asked what she should do. I told her to live, to find happiness where she could, because the dead gain nothing from our suffering. Wise advice, which I've never followed myself, she laughed. But it was sad. I've been so focused on the fight, on protecting what's left, I forgot about living. Jack turned to look at her. In the starlight, her face was softened, vulnerable in a way he'd rarely seen. It's not too late, isn't it? She met his gaze. Tomorrow we reach the meeting ground. You'll go back to your people. I'll go back to mine. In a week, maybe less, we could be shooting at each other across a battlefield. Or we could have peace. Do you really believe that? Jack wanted to lie, to offer her hope, but she deserved truth. I think we might delay the inevitable. Buy time. Maybe that's enough. Time for what? He didn't have an answer. Instead, acting on impulse, he reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away. You confuse me. Jack McKenna, she said again, but this time there was warmth in it. The feeling's mutual. They sat that way for a long while, hands linked, neither willing to break the connection. Jack knew he was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed, that this, whatever this was, could only complicate an already dangerous situation. But he couldn't bring himself to care. Finally, Morningstar squeezed his hand and stood. We should rest. Tomorrow. Tomorrow we go back to being enemies? We were never enemies, she said softly. That's what makes this hard. The next day dawned clear and cold. They broke camp in silence, both aware that their time alone was ending. As they neared the designated meeting ground, a flat area where the canyon opened into the valley, Jack could see riders approaching from the east. His heart sank as he recognized the lead rider, Colonel Marcus Bradshaw, the territorial militia commander who'd built his reputation on Indian fighting. "Soldiers," Morningstar said flatly. "You brought soldiers." "I didn't bring anyone," Jack said, but he knew how it looked. "I came alone, just as I promised." She studied the approaching riders, a dozen men, armed and ready for trouble. "It doesn't matter what you promised. They're here now." As the soldiers drew closer, Jack could see Bradshaw's weathered face set in its usual expression of grim determination. Beside him rode Mayor Thornton, looking uncomfortable on horseback, and several men from Bitter Creek. "McKenna," Bradshaw called out as they approached. "Glad to see you're still alive, though I see you've been fraternizing with the enemy." "This is Morningstar," Jack said carefully. "She speaks for the Apache in these negotiations." Bradshaw's eyes raked over Morningstar insultingly. "A woman? They send a woman to negotiate terms of war. I speak with more authority than you. Soldier," Morningstar said coldly, in perfect English. "I notice you hide behind your men and their guns. Are you afraid to talk without them?" The colonel's face reddened. "Savage witch, we should—" "Colonel," Jack interrupted sharply. "We're here to talk peace. Morningstar has terms from her people. I suggest we listen." "Terms?" Bradshaw laughed harshly. "The only terms I'm interested in is their complete surrender or removal. The Apache have raided their last wagon train." "What raid?" Jack demanded. "When?" Thornton spoke up nervously. 3 days ago. A supply wagon heading to Fort Grant. 2 drivers killed. Supplies taken." Jack looked at Morningstar, who seemed genuinely surprised. "My people were in camp 3 days ago. If there was a raid, it wasn't us. All Apache are liars." Bradshaw spat. "Just like all of them are thieves and murderers." "Colonel," Jack said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're not helping. I'm not here to help. McKenna, I'm here to deliver an ultimatum." Bradshaw straightened in his saddle. "The Apache have 1 week to move north of the Gila River. Any found south of it after that will be shot on sight." "That's impossible," Morningstar said. "Our winter camps, our burial grounds, everything is here. You're asking us to abandon our entire world." "I'm not asking." Bradshaw's hand moved to his sidearm. 1 week. Jack saw the moment everything went wrong. One of the younger soldiers, nervous and trigger-happy, interpreted the colonel's gesture as a signal. He raised his rifle. Morningstar, trained by a lifetime of warfare, saw the movement and reached for her own weapon. "No!" Jack shouted, spurring his horse between them. The clearing erupted in confusion. Soldiers reached for weapons, horses reared and screamed, and in the middle of it all, Jack fought desperately to prevent the bloodshed he could see coming. "Stand down!" he roared at the soldiers. "All of you, stand down!" For a moment, it seemed to work. The soldiers hesitated, looking to Bradshaw for orders. Morningstar held her position, rifle ready but not aimed, the world balanced on a knife's edge. Then, from the rocks above, came the whistle of an arrow. It took the young soldier who'd first raised his rifle in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse. Instantly, the clearing exploded into chaos. Rifles cracked, arrows flew, men and horses screamed. Jack found himself in the middle of a battle he'd tried so hard to prevent. "Ambush!" Bradshaw shouted. "Return fire!" Through the dust and gun smoke, Jack saw Morningstar wheeling her horse, trying to escape the crossfire. But she wasn't fleeing. She was shouting in Apache, trying to stop the attack. A bullet creased Jack's ribs, spinning him half out of his saddle. As he fought to control his panicking horse, he saw Morningstar go down. Her horse shot from under her. Without thinking, he drove his mount toward her. "Get on!" he shouted. Extending his hand, she looked up at him, decision flashing in her eyes. Then she gripped his hand and swung up behind him. Together, they fled into the rocks as the battle raged behind them. The abandoned mining town of Copper Falls sat like a collection of broken teeth against the hillside. its empty buildings offering the only shelter for miles. Jack guided his exhausted horse between the weathered structures, Morningstar's arms tight around his waist. Behind them, smoke still rose from the battlefield they'd fled. "Here!" Jack gasped, pulling up beside what had once been a saloon. Blood seeped through his shirt where the bullet had grazed his ribs. "We need to rest the horse." Morningstar slid down first, her rifle ready as she scanned their surroundings. "This place smells of death." She wasn't wrong. Copper Falls had died when the mine played out 5 years back, leaving behind empty dreams and rotting wood. But it would hide them, at least for a while. Inside the saloon, dust motes danced in the shafts of light streaming through broken windows. Jack slumped against the bar while Morningstar barricaded the door. When she turned back, her face was a mask of controlled fury. "This was planned," she said. "My warriors were supposed to stay back, to watch only. Someone told them to attack." "Just like someone made sure Bradshaw would be there," Jack said, wincing as he pressed his bandana against the wound. "We were both played." Morningstar moved closer, batting his hands away to examine the injury. "It needs cleaning. The bullet passed through, but it's deep." She looked around, spotting a half-empty bottle of whiskey behind the bar. "This will hurt." "I've had worse." "I'm sure you have." She poured the alcohol over the wound without warning. Jack bit back a curse, his vision going white for a moment. When it cleared, Morningstar was tearing strips from her undershirt to bind the wound, her movements efficient but gentle. "Why did you come back for me?" she asked without looking up. "Seemed like the right thing to do." "The right thing would have been to stay with your people. Now you're marked as a traitor. They'll hunt you alongside me." "Let them try." She finished binding the wound and stepped back. For a moment, their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Then gunfire echoed in the distance, breaking the spell. "They're sweeping the hills," Morningstar said, moving to a window. "Both sides, looking for survivors to kill. We need to move. My horse is done. We pushed him too hard." "Then we walk." She gathered what supplies they could find, a canteen, some moldy hardtack, ammunition from Jack's saddlebags. "There's a box canyon 5 miles north, water, shelter, and only one way in. We can defend it if necessary." They slipped out the back as voices grew closer. Jack's side screamed with each step, but he pushed through it. Morningstar led them up a treacherous goat path, her knowledge of the terrain keeping them ahead of their pursuers. As night fell, they reached the canyon she'd described, a narrow cleft in the rock that opened into a wider space with a small spring. Ancient ruins clung to the cliff walls, evidence of peoples who'd sought shelter here long before. "Anasazi," Morningstar said, seeing Jack's interest. "The ancient ones. They knew how to hide from enemies." They made camp in one of the more intact structures, its stone walls still solid after centuries. No fire, the smoke would bring hunters. Instead, they sat in darkness, sharing the meager food and listening to the night sounds. "What happens now?" Jack asked eventually. "War," Morningstar said simply. "Real war. What happened today killed any chance of peace. Both sides will want blood. There has to be a way to stop it. If we can prove someone orchestrated this, who would listen? Your colonel wants our land. My war chiefs want revenge. The truth doesn't matter anymore." Jack knew she was right, but accepting it felt like defeat. "So we just give up?" "I didn't say that." She moved closer in the darkness. He could feel her warmth, smell the sage and gunpowder in her hair. "Tell me, Jack McKenna, what did you see today when the fighting started?" "Chaos, fear, men dying for nothing. I saw you ride into gunfire for me. A white man risking his life for an Apache woman." "Why?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. "Because somewhere between that first night and now, you became more than just a negotiator to me." "How much more?" Her voice was soft, vulnerable in a way he'd rarely heard. Jack reached out in the darkness, found her hand. "More than is wise, more than is safe. Nothing about this has been safe. She interlaced their fingers. When I was young, my grandmother told me a story about a warrior woman who fell in love with her enemy. It ended badly. How badly? They died together, fighting a battle neither could win, but the story says their spirits still walk the mountains. Finally, at peace. She laughed softly. I used to think it was romantic. Now I understand it was a warning. We're not them, aren't we? She pulled her hand away and stood. I should take first watch. Jack caught her arm gently. Star, wait. It was the first time he'd shortened her name, and they both felt the intimacy of it. She stood frozen for a moment, then sank back down beside him. This is impossible, she whispered. I know. My people will call me a traitor. Yours already do. I know that too. Then why? He silenced her with a kiss. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the other would pull away. Then her hand came up to cup his face, and the kiss deepened, became something desperate and necessary. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. This changes nothing, Morningstar said, but her voice shook. It changes everything. Jack countered. She was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly he almost missed it. I know. They held each other in the darkness. Two people caught between worlds, finding solace in an impossible connection. Outside, coyotes howled, and somewhere in the distance, hunters still searched. But for this moment, in this ancient place of refuge, they allowed themselves to forget about tomorrow. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the sound of horses in the canyon below. Morningstar was instantly alert, rifle in hand as she peered through a gap in the stones. Apache, she said. My people, 6 warriors. Can you talk to them? After yesterday, they'll shoot first. She turned to him. But they might listen if I go alone, if I can make them understand what really happened. No. Jack struggled to his feet. We stay together. You're wounded, and you're white. They'll kill you on sight. Then we find another way. Morningstar looked torn. Then voices rose from below. Speaking in Apache, her face went pale. What is it? Jack asked. Black Crow leads them. He's saying I led our warriors into a trap, that I conspired with you to betray our people. Her voice was bitter. They've named me traitor. Then we run. Where? Your people hunt us from the south, mine from the north. Where is there to go? Jack thought quickly. West, into the desert. There's a mission station at San Carlos, run by Franciscan brothers. They give sanctuary to anyone who asks. That's 60 miles through the worst country. You're wounded. We have little water. Better than certain death here. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. The ancient ones had paths through the cliffs. This way. They slipped out through a narrow crevice in the back wall, emerging on a ledge high above the canyon floor. Morningstar led the way, finding handholds and footholds that seemed impossible. Jack followed, his wound screaming, sweat pouring down his face despite the morning chill. By the time they reached the desert floor on the far side of the ridge, Jack was gray-faced and stumbling. Morningstar supported him, her strength surprising for her size. We need to find shelter, she said. You're losing too much blood. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. She scanned the landscape, then pointed to a cluster of rocks a mile distant. There! We rest until dark, then travel by night. They barely made it to the rocks before Jack collapsed. Morningstar worked quickly, checking his wound, forcing him to drink precious water. The bullet graze had reopened, bleeding freely. This needs proper treatment, she said. Herbs, clean bandages. Just do what you can. She looked at him with something like despair. Why are you doing this? You could have stayed with the soldiers. Blamed everything on me. Been a hero. I'm nobody's hero, Jack said weakly. Haven't been for a long time. You're mine, she said softly, then seemed surprised by her own words, as she worked to clean and rebind his wound with strips from her own clothing. Jack studied her face, even exhausted and covered in trail dust. She was beautiful, but more than that. She was fierce, loyal, unbroken despite everything. "Star," he said, "if we don't make it, we'll make it. But if we don't," she pressed her fingers to his lips, "then we'll walk the mountains as spirits, like the lovers in my grandmother's story. But we're not dying today. Jack McKenna, I won't allow it." Her determination was contagious. Jack managed a smile. "Yes, ma'am. Rest now. When darkness comes, we move." As Jack drifted into uneasy sleep, Morningstar kept watch, her rifle ready. The desert stretched endlessly before them, hostile and unforgiving. Behind them, two peoples prepared for war, each side convinced of their righteousness. But here, in this small shelter of stone, a different truth existed. Two people who should have been enemies had found something worth fighting for, not land or gold or revenge, but each other. It wasn't enough to stop the coming storm, but perhaps it was enough to survive it. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth. Buzzards circled in the distance, and Morningstar sang softly in Apache, a warrior's song, a protection prayer, a promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. The desert at night transformed into an alien landscape of silver shadows and whispered threats. Jack leaned heavily on Morningstar as they navigated the treacherous terrain, each step a small victory against the pain that threatened to overwhelm him. They'd been walking for 3 hours, and he could feel his strength ebbing like water into sand. There, Morningstar pointed to a dark smudge against the horizon. "Joshua trees, where they grow. Sometimes there's water trapped in the rocks." It took another hour to reach the grove. Jack collapsed against one of the twisted trees while Morningstar searched the area. The sound of her quiet exclamation brought hope. She'd found a small pool of water in a natural basin, fed by some underground source. "Drink slowly," she warned, helping him to the water's edge. The water was brackish but cool. Jack forced himself to take small sips, while Morningstar refilled their canteen and wet strips of cloth to cool his fevered skin. "Your wound is infected," she said quietly. "Without proper medicine, I've survived worse." "Stop saying that." Her voice carried an edge of frustration. "Stop pretending this is nothing. You could die out here, and for what? For me? I'm not worth—" "Yes, you are." Jack caught her hand. "You're worth this and more. Don't ever doubt that." In the moonlight, he saw tears tracking down her dust-stained cheeks. "My people have a saying, tears are for the living, not the dying. I haven't cried since my brother fell. Why now? Because now you have something to lose again." She laughed bitterly. "I should have stayed a warrior. Warriors don't feel this way. Warriors don't—" She broke off as the sound of horses carried across the desert. They froze, listening. The sound was distant but distinct. Multiple riders, moving fast. "Into the rocks," Morningstar hissed, helping Jack to his feet. They scrambled into a cluster of boulders just as the riders crested a distant ridge. Even in the moonlight, Jack could make out the shapes, a mixed group, some in cavalry uniforms, others in civilian clothes. "Bounty hunters," he whispered. "Bradshaw must have put a price on our heads." "Both of us? After yesterday?" "You're probably worth as much as me." They huddled deeper into the rocks as the riders passed within 100 yards of their position. Jack held his breath, aware that one sound could bring death raining down on them. Morningstar pressed against him, her rifle ready but knowing that fighting would only bring more hunters. The riders passed, heading east toward the mountains. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded completely did they dare to breathe normally again. "We can't stay here," Morningstar said. "They'll double back when they don't find our trail." "I know." Jack struggled to stand, black spots dancing in his vision. "How far to the mission?" 40 miles, maybe less. But you can't—" "I can." He took a step and nearly fell. "I have to—" Morningstar caught him, her arm around his waist. "Stubborn fool. That's what Mary used to say. Your wife was a smart woman." They pushed on through the night, Jack leaning more heavily on Morningstar with each passing mile. She bore his weight without complaint, her strength seemingly endless. As dawn approached, she spotted a shallow cave in a cliff face. "We rest here today," she declared, half carrying him inside. The cave was little more than a hollow in the rock, but it offered shade and concealment. Morningstar made Jack as comfortable as possible, then set about gathering desert plants she'd spotted nearby. "Chewing stick," she explained, crushing the leaves between stones, "and desert marigold. My mother taught me these remedies." She made a poultice for his wound, and the cooling effect was immediate. Jack watched her work, noting the efficient grace of her movements, the gentle care in her touch. "Tell me about your mother," he said, needing distraction from the pain. Morningstar's hands paused briefly. "She was taken in a raid when she was 15, Mexican girl from Sonora. My father saw her and decided she would be his wife." She continued working. "It wasn't gentle, not at first, but somehow they found love, real love. She taught him Spanish. He taught her our ways. They were happy, in their fashion." "What happened to them?" "Soldiers attacked our camp 10 winters ago. My father died protecting the children. My mother." She was quiet for a moment. "She took his rifle and held them off while we escaped. I found her body 3 days later. They'd done things." She shook her head. "She died a warrior. That's what matters." Jack reached out and touched her face gently. "You are your mother's daughter, and my father's." She leaned into his touch briefly, then pulled away. "Rest now. I'll keep watch." But Jack couldn't rest. The fever was building despite the poultice, and dark thoughts crowded his mind. "Star, if something happens to me, nothing will happen. Listen to me." He caught her hand. "If I don't make it, you keep going. Get to the mission. Start a new life somewhere they don't know you." "As what? A tame Indian begging for scraps from white charity?" She shook her head fiercely. "If you die, I die fighting. It's the warrior's way. That's pride talking. Pride is all I have left." She moved to the cave entrance, scanning the brightening landscape. "My honor is gone. I'm named traitor by my own people. My family is lost to me. Everything I was, everything I fought for, is ash. All I have is pride and what?" She turned back to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And a stubborn white man who insists on dying for me in the desert. I'm not dying. Liar." But she smiled as she said it, and for a moment, the weight of their situation lifted. The day passed in a haze of heat and fitful dozing. Jack's fever climbed despite Morningstar's efforts. She forced him to drink, bathed his face with precious water, sang softly in Apache when he thrashed in delirium. In his fevered dreams, he was back at the negotiation, but this time he saw it clearly. The careful positioning of men, the signals passed between conspirators, the trap closing around them. Faces swam before him, Bradshaw's satisfied smirk, a townsman's guilty glance, an Apache warrior's knowing nod, the pieces of a puzzle he was too late to solve. He woke to find Morningstar lying beside him, her body pressed against his for warmth as the desert night brought its chill. Her eyes were open, watching him. "You were talking," she said softly, "about the ambush. You kept saying they knew, they all knew." "Someone wanted war," Jack muttered. "Someone on both sides. We were just pawns." "I know." Her hand found his in the darkness. "Black Crow was too quick to call me traitor, and your colonel arrived too fast, too ready for battle. We were meant to fail. Why? What does anyone gain from war? Land, gold, army contracts, glory." She laughed bitterly. "Pick your poison. Men always find reasons to spill blood." They lay in silence for a while, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Then Morningstar spoke again, so quietly he almost missed it. "I'm frightened." It was an admission that cost her. He knew. Warriors, especially women warriors, couldn't afford to show fear. "So am I," Jack admitted. "But not of dying. What then? Of not having enough time, of finally finding something worth living for and losing it." She raised up on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight. "Is that what I am? Something worth living for?" You know you are. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, as if she could pour her strength into him through touch alone. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "Live," she commanded. "Live, and we'll find a way through this. Together." "Together," he agreed. And for the first time since the ambush, he truly believed it might be possible. Dawn brought new challenges. Jack could barely stand, and they still had 20 miles to cover. Morningstar fashioned a travois from Joshua tree branches and her saddle blanket, ignoring Jack's protests. "The great warrior reduced to dragging a white man through the desert," she said with forced lightness. "My ancestors must be laughing. Star, save your strength for healing. I'll need you whole when we reach the mission." She set off with determination, dragging the makeshift stretcher across the desert floor. Jack watched the sky pass overhead, fighting to stay conscious, knowing that if he slipped away, she'd never forgive herself. The sun climbed mercilessly. Morningstar's steps grew shorter. Her breathing labored, but she didn't stop. When she stumbled, she pushed herself up and continued. When the travois caught on rocks, she freed it and pressed on. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," Jack said during one of their brief rest stops. "Flattery won't make me move faster," she panted, but he saw her smile. By afternoon, the mission bells were visible in the distance. The sight gave Morningstar new strength, and she covered the final miles in a burst of desperate energy. As they approached the adobe walls, brown-robed figures emerged. "Sanctuary," Morningstar gasped in Spanish. "We claim sanctuary." The monks asked no questions. They carried Jack inside, Morningstar refusing to leave his side, as the brothers tended his wound with skilled hands and proper medicines. Jack heard one of them speaking quietly to Morningstar. "The soldiers were here yesterday, asking about fugitives. They'll return. Then we'll be gone before they do." Morningstar replied firmly, "Rest first." The monk said kindly, "God grants sanctuary to all who need it. Rest, heal, then decide." As the medicines took effect and Jack felt the fever finally breaking, he reached for Morningstar's hand. She was there, as he'd known she would be, her fingers intertwining with his. They'd survived the desert, but greater challenges lay ahead, somewhere out there. Two peoples prepared for war. Justice had been twisted into revenge, and truth buried under ambition and hate. But here in this quiet sanctuary, two unlikely souls had found something worth fighting for, not just survival, but a future together. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about their path had been easy. But as Jack drifted into healing sleep, Morningstar's hand in his, he knew they'd face whatever came next the same way they'd faced the desert. Together. Brother Francisco proved to be more than just a monk. He'd been an army surgeon before finding his calling. As he changed Jack's bandages on the third morning, his expression was grave. "The infection is retreating, but slowly. You need at least another week of rest." "We don't have a week," Morningstar said from the window where she kept watch. "The patrols are getting closer. Yesterday they searched the market in town." Jack struggled to sit up. "We need to move. If they find us here, they'll punish the mission for harboring fugitives." "Where would you go?" Brother Francisco asked. "You can barely walk, and every trail is watched." Morningstar turned from the window. "There's something we haven't told you. The ambush, it wasn't random. Someone orchestrated it, someone who wanted war between my people and the town." The monk's eyes sharpened. "You have proof?" "Only what we saw and heard." Jack said, "But I remember faces, conversations. There was a man with Bradshaw, not a soldier, well-dressed, soft hands. He kept whispering to the colonel, 'Theodore Morrison,'" Brother Francisco said quietly. "The banker's son. He's been buying up land grants, hoping to sell to the railroad when it comes through." Morningstar moved closer. "Railroad?" "Rumors only, but persistent ones. A spur line from Tucson to El Paso. It would be worth millions to whoever owns the land." The monk shook his head. "But the treaties with the Apache would be void if the Apache attacked first." Jack finished. Start a war. Drive them off the land. And suddenly those worthless desert claims become gold. I've seen papers. Morningstar said suddenly. In the soldiers' camp where they held me before the negotiation. Maps with marks. Areas circled. I thought they were military plans, but they were surveyors' marks. Jack said, the pieces falling into place. Morrison needed the Apache gone, and Bradshaw wanted glory. They used us. Brother Francisco stood. This changes things. If you could prove this conspiracy, who would listen? Morningstar asked bitterly. A wounded ex-soldier and an Apache woman? Against the word of respected townsmen. Judge Harriman in Tucson might, the monk said thoughtfully. He's federal, not territorial, and he has no love for Bradshaw's methods. But you'd need evidence, witnesses. Jack looked at Morningstar. The prospectors, the ones we saw on sacred land. If they're part of this, if we could find them, it's suicide, she said flatly. You can barely ride, and we'd be heading back into the heart of danger, as opposed to the safety of being hunted fugitives. They stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. Brother Francisco cleared his throat. There is another way. I have a wagon going to Tucson tomorrow for supplies. You could hide in the back, get to the judge directly. And then what? Morningstar demanded. We make accusations we can't prove? They'll arrest us on the spot. Or, Jack said slowly, we split up. You go to Tucson, tell the judge what we know. I go back, find evidence. No, Morningstar's voice was sharp. We stay together. Star, I said no. She moved to his bedside. You nearly died in the desert. I won't lose you to pride and foolishness. And I won't let them start a war based on lies. Jack caught her hand. People will die. Your people. Innocent settlers. We can stop this. Or die trying. Maybe. But isn't it worth the risk? Brother Francisco left them to argue, returning an hour later to find them sitting in tense silence. There's news, he said. A traitor just arrived. Fighting has broken out along Skeleton Canyon. The Apache raided a supply train, and the cavalry retaliated by attacking a fishing camp. Dozens dead on both sides. Morningstar closed her eyes. It's begun. All the more reason to act quickly, Jack said. He looked at the monk. Is there another way? Someone in town who might help? Brother Francisco considered. There's Samuel Brennan, the newspaper man. He's questioned Bradshaw's policies before. But he'd need proof, something undeniable. Then we get it, Morningstar said suddenly. Both of us, together. She looked at Jack. You're right. People are dying. My people, your people. If there's even a chance to stop this, you'll need help, the monk said. I can't leave the mission, but I know someone. Maria Gonzalez. She runs the boarding house in Copper Falls. Her husband was killed by Bradshaw's men 2 years ago, accused of horse theft. He didn't commit. She has no love for the colonel. Copper Falls, Jack mused. Where we first took shelter, it's abandoned. The town is, but Maria stayed. She helps people sometimes, people who need to disappear. Morningstar and Jack exchanged glances. An ally, even a reluctant one, could make the difference. That night, they prepared to leave. Brother Francisco provided them with Mexican clothing, Jack as a vaquero, Morningstar as his wife. It wasn't much of a disguise, but it might let them pass casual inspection. The wagon leaves at dawn. The monk said, It'll take you within 5 miles of Copper Falls. From there, he shrugged. God go with you. Morningstar had been quiet throughout the preparations, but as they bedded down in the mission's stable, she finally spoke. If we fail, if they catch us, they won't. Jack. She turned to face him in the darkness. I need you to promise something. If it comes to a choice between evidence and escape, we run. The truth isn't worth your life. Isn't it? Not to me. She moved closer. I've lost everything else. I won't lose you too. He pulled her against him. We'll be careful. Get in. Find what we need. Get out. No heroics, says the man who rode into gunfire for me. That was different? How? I couldn't let them hurt you. She was quiet for a moment. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met differently? If there was no war, no conflict? We wouldn't have met at all. Maybe. Or maybe we'd have met at a trading post or a frontier town. You'd have tipped your hat. I'd have ignored you properly. Despite everything, Jack chuckled. You wouldn't have ignored me. Such confidence. But she was smiling against his chest. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'd have noticed the sadness in your eyes, wondered about your story, and I'd have seen a woman unlike any other and forgotten how to speak. Sweet talker. They held each other in the darkness, both aware this might be their last peaceful night. Tomorrow they'd ride back into danger, seeking truth in a world that preferred comfortable lies. Whatever happens, Morningstar whispered, I want you to know, these days with you, even running, even afraid, have been the best I've known in years. You made me remember I'm more than just a warrior. You made me remember I'm still alive, Jack replied, that there's something beyond guilt and ghosts. She kissed him softly. Then, whatever comes, we've already won something. Dawn arrived too quickly. They huddled in the supply wagon as it rolled out of the mission, hidden beneath canvas and crates. The ride was bumpy and stifling, but they endured it in silence, hands clasped between them. When the driver finally stopped and gave the all-clear, they emerged into harsh daylight miles from anywhere. Copper Falls sat in the distance, a dark smudge against the hills. You sure about this? Jack asked one final time. Morningstar checked her rifle, then looked at him with those fierce dark eyes. I'm sure about you. The rest, we'll figure out as we go. They set off toward the ghost town and whatever secrets it might hold. Behind them, smoke rose from distant fires where Apache and soldiers clashed. Ahead lay possible redemption or certain death, but they walked together. And somehow, that made all the difference. The abandoned buildings of Copper Falls looked even more desolate in daylight. They approached carefully, using the scattered boulders for cover, until they reached the edge of town. There! Morningstar pointed to a building set apart from the others. Smoke from the chimney. As they drew closer, a figure emerged. A Mexican woman in her 40s, rifle in hand but not aimed. She studied them for a long moment. You're the ones Francisco sent word about, she said finally. The soldier and the Apache woman. Come, quickly. Inside, the boarding house was surprisingly well maintained. Maria Gonzalez set food before them without being asked. Francisco says you seek evidence against Bradshaw and Morrison. You know about them? Jack asked. Maria's face hardened. Morrison holds the note on half the land around here. When people can't pay, Bradshaw's men drive them off. My husband asked too many questions. She crossed herself. They hanged him for a horse thief, but he never stole nothing. We're sorry, Morningstar said softly. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead, but justice might let them rest. Maria leaned forward. Morrison keeps papers in his town office, ledgers, land deals, correspondence, but it's guarded. How do you know this? I clean for him twice a week. The great man won't soil his hands with Mexican servants' work, so he ignores me. Her smile was sharp. Men like him never think the help has ears. Jack felt hope stir. Could you get us in? Maybe. Tomorrow's cleaning day. But if you're caught, we won't involve you, Morningstar promised. Maria studied them. An Apache woman and a white man, risking everything to stop a war. My husband would have liked you both. She stood. Rest today. Tomorrow, we see if truth is stronger than greed. As Maria bustled about preparing a room for them, Jack caught Morningstar's eye. They'd found their ally and a plan. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had that morning. The game was entering its final moves. Soon, they'd know if love and justice could triumph over conspiracy and hate. The odds were long, but they'd beaten long odds before. Together. The pre-dawn darkness cloaked Bitter Creek as Maria led them through back alleys toward Morrison's office. Jack's wound still pulled with each movement, but he pushed through the pain. Morningstar moved like a shadow beside him, her every sense alert for danger. "Guards change shift at dawn," Maria whispered. "We have maybe 20 minutes." The office sat above Morrison's bank, accessed by an outside staircase. Maria produced a key. "He never changed the locks after my husband died. Arrogant fool." Inside, the office smelled of cigar smoke and leather. Heavy curtains blocked the windows, allowing them to light a single candle. Filing cabinets lined one wall, while Morrison's massive desk dominated the center. "Star, check the cabinets." Jack said, "Maria, watch the stairs. I'll take the desk." They worked in tense silence. Jack found the locked drawer quickly. Too quickly. His instincts screamed trap, but they had no choice. He picked the lock with skills learned in another life. Inside lay exactly what they'd hoped for: correspondence between Morrison and railroad investors, maps marking Apache territories for acquisition, and most damning, a letter from Bradshaw discussing the necessity of provocation to void treaty obligations. "Jack," Morningstar called softly, "look at this." She held a ledger showing payments to the prospectors they'd seen, to several townsmen, and shockingly, to Black Crow. The Apache warrior who'd condemned Morningstar had been bought. "They planned it all," she said, voice thick with betrayal. "Even my own people." The door burst open. Colonel Bradshaw stood there, pistol drawn, flanked by soldiers. Well, the lovebirds caught in their nest." Maria gasped. Jack moved to shield both women, his hand on his gun. "I wouldn't," Bradshaw said conversationally. "My men have orders to shoot the ladies first if you try anything heroic." "How?" Morningstar demanded. "Mrs. Gonzalez here has been most helpful." Bradshaw smiled coldly. "You see, we hold the note on her little boarding house too. Amazing what people will do to keep a roof over their heads." Maria sobbed. "I'm sorry. They said they'd burn it down. Turn me out." "It's all right," Jack said quietly, though his heart sank. "You did what you had to." "Touching," Bradshaw sneered. "Now then, you'll put down your weapons and come quietly. Morrison wants to thank you personally for breaking into his office. Gives us perfect grounds to hang you both as thieves." "You won't get away with this," Jack said. "People will ask questions." "What people? A drifter and a savage? The good citizens will applaud us for stopping a conspiracy." Bradshaw's smile widened. "Oh, yes, that's the story. You two were planning to rob the bank, fund an Apache uprising." Tragic how love drives people to crime. Jack felt Morningstar tense beside him. He knew that stance. She was preparing to fight, to die rather than be taken. He couldn't let that happen. "Wait," he said. "The evidence. We already sent copies to Judge Harriman in Tucson." Bradshaw's smile faltered. "You're lying." "Are we?" "Brother Francisco has connections, even now. A writer carries proof of your conspiracy." It was a desperate bluff, but Jack sold it with everything he had. "Kill us, and you make us martyrs. The truth will out." "Sir," one of the soldiers said nervously, "if they did send word—" "Shut up!" Bradshaw's composure cracked. "Morrison assured me." He stopped, realizing what he'd revealed. Morningstar laughed, cold and sharp. "Not so clever after all. Tell me, Colonel, what's your price? 30 pieces of silver, or just the promise of glory?" Bradshaw's face went red. He raised his pistol toward her. Jack moved without thinking, throwing himself at the colonel. The gun went off, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. Pain seared across Jack's shoulder, his barely healed wound tearing open. But he got his hands on Bradshaw's gun arm. "Run!" he shouted to Morningstar. But she wasn't running. Her knife flashed in the candlelight, and suddenly one soldier was down, clutching his leg. She moved like flowing water, using the desk for cover as shots splintered wood around her. Maria, sobbing, grabbed a heavy ledger and brought it down on another soldier's head. "For my husband!" she screamed. The office became a battlefield. Jack and Bradshaw rolled across the floor, fighting for the gun. Morningstar had acquired a rifle from the fallen soldier and was holding the doorway, preventing reinforcements from entering. "You're finished, Bradshaw," Jack grunted, finally getting leverage. Even if you kill us, too many people know the truth now. Then I'll die a patriot, Bradshaw snarled. Better than letting savages keep land meant for civilization. The gun went off between them. For a moment, neither moved. Then Bradshaw's grip loosened, red spreading across his chest. He looked surprised. "Damn," he whispered, and died. Jack struggled to his feet. Morningstar was still fighting, but more soldiers were coming up the stairs. They were trapped. Then, unexpectedly, new voices joined the fray. "Federal marshals, everyone stand down!" Judge Harriman's men flooded the office. The remaining soldiers, leaderless without Bradshaw, surrendered quickly. An older man in a black suit entered. Harriman himself. "Mr. McKenna, Miss Morningstar. Brother Francisco sent word you might need assistance." "The evidence," Jack gasped, pointing to the scattered papers. "It's all here. The conspiracy—" "We'll sort it out," Harriman said calmly. He looked at Maria, still clutching the bloodied ledger. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us. There'll be questions." "I'll testify," she said firmly. "About everything. My husband's death, what I heard, what they made me do." As the marshals collected evidence and bodies, Morningstar knelt beside Jack, checking his reopened wound. "You fool! You could have been killed. So could you. That's different." "No," he said, catching her hand. "It's not anymore." Judge Harriman cleared his throat. "You two need medical attention, and then we'll need full statements. This conspiracy, if it's as deep as it appears, will take time to unravel." "What about the fighting?" Morningstar asked. "My people, the town. I've already sent riders with ceasefire orders. The truth about Bradshaw and Morrison should cool hot heads on both sides." He paused. "Though prejudice doesn't die easily, there'll still be those wanting blood. There always are," Jack said wearily. They were taken to the doctor's house, where Jack's wound was properly treated again. Morningstar refused to leave his side, despite the stares and whispers from townspeople gathering outside. Samuel Brennan, the newspaper man, arrived with his notebook. "Is it true? Morrison and Bradshaw conspired to start a war?" "Print the truth," Morningstar told him. "All of it. How greed nearly destroyed two peoples. How warriors on both sides were corrupted. How peace was sacrificed for profit." "And you two?" Brennan asked. "What happens to you now?" Jack and Morningstar looked at each other. It was a fair question. The immediate danger was past, but they were still a white man and an Apache woman in a world that didn't approve of such unions. "We'll face whatever comes," Jack said finally. "Together. Together." Morningstar agreed. News traveled fast. By noon, Morrison had been arrested trying to flee town. Black Crow was taken by his own people for judgment. The ceasefire held, though tensions remained high. That evening, as Jack rested in the doctor's house, Morningstar sat beside his bed. Through the window, they could see the sunset painting the desert in shades of gold and red. "Your wife would be proud," Morningstar said quietly. "You stopped a war." "We stopped it," Jack corrected. "And I think Mary would be happy I found someone to live for again." Morningstar's eyes glistened. "My brother once told me that love was the only thing stronger than hate. I thought him a romantic fool. And now I know he was right." She leaned down and kissed him gently. "Whatever comes next, whether we stay here, go elsewhere, face acceptance or prejudice, we face it as one. As one." Jack agreed. Outside, the town was slowly coming to terms with the truth. Some celebrated, some grumbled. But the immediate threat of war had passed. It wasn't perfect peace. Perhaps that was impossible between peoples with so much history of conflict. But it was a start. Judge Harriman visited them the next day. "You'll both need to testify at the trials. After that, well, the territory's big. Plenty of places for a new start. If that's what you want." "What about her people?" Jack asked. "The charges against her. I've spoken with the Apache Council. In light of Black Crow's betrayal and her actions to prevent war, they're willing to lift the banishment. He looked at Morningstar. "You can go home if you wish." Morningstar was quiet for a moment. Then she took Jack's hand. "Home isn't a place. It's where your heart rests. Mine has found its rest." 3 months later, they stood before Brother Francisco in the mission chapel. The ceremony was simple, a blending of traditions, Apache and Christian, witnessed by Maria Gonzalez, Samuel Brennan, and, surprisingly, several townspeople in Apache who'd come to respect what they'd done. "You realize," Brother Francisco said with a smile, "this makes you both permanent outcasts from the narrow-minded." "We're used to that," Jack replied, unable to take his eyes off Morningstar in her wedding dress, a beautiful blend of Apache beadwork and Mexican lace. "Good," the monk said, "because the world needs more people willing to stand in the space between, building bridges instead of walls." As they exchanged vows, promising to stand together against whatever storms might come, Jack thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first tense meeting around a campfire to this moment of joy, it had been a path marked by violence and pain, but also by hope and unexpected love. The war had been prevented, though vigilance would always be needed. Morrison and his conspirators would face justice, though the prejudice that made their scheme possible would take generations to fade. But here, in this moment, two people who should have been enemies had found in each other the rarest of gifts, a love stronger than the forces trying to divide them. As they walked from the chapel into the desert sunset, Morningstar suddenly laughed. "What?" Jack asked. "I was just thinking. They were right about one thing. The tribe did send their most beautiful warrior to negotiate. They just never imagined the negotiation would end like this." Jack pulled her close. "Their loss, my gain. Our gain," she corrected, and kissed him as the sun painted the world in shades of possibility. They had no illusions about the challenges ahead. The world wasn't ready for what they represented, but they'd already proven that love could bloom in the harshest ground, that understanding could bridge the deepest divides, and sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough to change everything. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope you enjoyed following Jack and Morningstar on their journey from conflict to love. Where are you listening to this story from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and let me know your thoughts. What did you think of Jack and Morningstar's story? Your feedback means everything.